Researchers in Turkey now claim they found indisputable evidence that the story of Noah's Ark was not a cautionary tale.
Thousands of years ago, Noah's Ark was said to have drifted across a world drowned in water, carrying the last breath of life through the Great Flood. Most people believed it was only an ancient tale. Until one day, deep within the snow-covered mountains of eastern Turkey, researchers discovered a strange mound shaped like a ship, perfectly matching the place described in the Bible. And when modern scanning technology was applied, unusual signals began to appear beneath the layers of earth and stone, revealing a mystery that could change how humanity understands its own history. It began with a single photograph, one that would change how the world looked at an ancient legend. High above the snow-covered peaks of eastern Turkey, a military plane was flying its usual mapping mission. The crew expected nothing unusual that day, until one officer noticed something strange taking shape below. It wasn't a shadow or a valley. It was a long, curved outline carved into the earth, stretching almost 160 meters from end to end, the size of a massive ship resting on land. The officer's name was İlhan Durupinar, a captain in the Turkish Air Force. He marked the coordinates, took another look, and felt a quiet chill run through him. The shape lay not far from Mount Ararat, the very mountain where the Bible says Noah's Ark came to rest after the Great Flood. When the photographs reached Ankara, the military shared them with local geographers, and soon the story escaped into the public. By 1960, newspapers across Europe were filled with one headline: "Has Noah's Ark been found?" BBC and National Geographic reported on the strange formation, while Life magazine published the now famous aerial shot that sparked global fascination. People from all faiths and backgrounds began to look toward Turkey with renewed curiosity. Was this a miracle or just a trick of nature? Scientists and believers alike rushed to see the site that would later be known as the Durupinar Formation. It sat in a remote valley shaped by earthquakes and landslides, a land where geology often played tricks on the human eye. To some, the curved outline looked too perfect to be natural. To others, it was merely a coincidence, an illusion sculpted by erosion and time. In the 1980s, American explorer Ron Wyatt arrived with his own theories. He claimed to have found petrified wood, ancient rivets, and traces of metal buried within the structure. His announcements reignited the world's fascination, painting Durupinar as a possible resting place of the Ark. But the scientific community was not convinced. Geologists examined his photos and samples, concluding that the materials were natural rock formations, not remnants of an ancient vessel. Even so, Wyatt's discovery fueled decades of debate, drawing crowds of pilgrims, journalists, and researchers to this lonely stretch of mountain. What Captain Durupinar once saw from the sky had become a battleground between faith and science, a question that no one could answer with certainty. And yet, as time passed, the formation refused to fade into obscurity. It waited quietly, half buried in earth and mystery, as if protecting something still undiscovered beneath its surface. If the photo was only the beginning, what would happen when science finally looked deeper into the soil? For decades, the Durupinar site sat in silence, waiting for science to return. After the first wave of excitement faded, many dismissed the discovery as a natural formation. But in 2021, a new generation of researchers decided to look again, this time with technology far beyond what the human eye could see. A joint team from Agri Ibrahim Taycan University, Istanbul Technical University, and Andrews University in the United States launched what they called the Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark Research Project. Their goal was simple yet ambitious: to find out if the mysterious shape under the soil was just rock or something built by human hands thousands of years ago. Instead of shovels and picks, They brought sensors, radars, and digital imaging systems. The first step was ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, a tool that sends electromagnetic waves deep into the ground. Each wave bounces back differently depending on what it hits: stone, metal, or empty space. This allowed scientists to build a three-dimensional map of what lay beneath without digging a single inch. Alongside that, they used electrical resistivity imaging, a method that measures how well electricity flows through the soil. Certain materials, like metal or wood, resist current in unique ways, creating patterns that hint at buried structures. As the data began to load on their screens, the outlines shocked everyone. Beneath the surface, they detected long, parallel lines running side by side, almost like planks arranged with precision. There were rectangular voids, layered zones, and even a central corridor stretching more than 70 meters, eerily close to the Ark's dimensions recorded in Genesis. For a moment, it seemed as if science had finally caught up with legend. Yet, as always, the results split the community in two. While some researchers described the data as highly suggestive of an artificial structure, geologists argued that nature could produce the same effect. They pointed to ancient mudflows, frozen lava, and tectonic compression that could fold sediment into shapes mimicking architecture. Dr. Naci Görür, a respected Turkish geologist, noted that the region's violent seismic history often creates pseudo-structures that deceive even advanced instruments. Others raised a different concern. None of the data had yet been published in an international peer-reviewed journal. Without that step, the findings remained in what scientists called the gray zone between discovery and speculation. Still, for believers, the images were enough. Local officials even began plans to protect the area, calling it a heritage site of both faith and science. Satellite imaging confirmed that the formation's outer shape remained intact despite erosion, and underground anomalies continued to appear with each new scan. It was as though something beneath the soil was trying to be found. To skeptics, the answer lay in geology. To others, it lay in history. But one question lingered over every debate. If these patterns are truly natural, why do they follow the measurements of an ancient ship described 5,000 years ago? And if the ground beneath Ararat remembers more than we think, what else might it still be hiding? The deeper scientists looked into the Durupinar site, the stranger the story became. Samples were carefully collected from the inner ridge of the formation and sent to multiple laboratories for analysis. What they found was not what anyone expected. The soil contained potassium levels 3 times higher than the surrounding ground, and its organic content was 200 to 300% above normal. Its pH ranged between 5.2 and 5.8, slightly acidic, the same condition that appears when ancient plant matter decomposes slowly over thousands of years. To chemists, these results were a clue. The land had once held something alive. But whether that something was a natural forest or a massive wooden structure was the question that divided the team. At the National Geographic Research Lab, experts introduced a term for this mystery: chemical memory. They described it as the ability of soil to retain traces of materials that have long disappeared, almost like a fingerprint left by time itself. When the Durupinar samples were examined under microscopes, no solid wood remained, yet the soil was filled with tiny organic compounds. These fragments carried chemical markers similar to cellulose, the main component of wood, but none of the original structure survived. Carbon isotope dating placed the age of these compounds at around 4,800 years old, a number that aligned uncannily with the period many associate with the Great Flood. However, science is rarely satisfied with coincidence. Some researchers argued that the high organic content could simply come from ancient vegetation buried by landslides or volcanic ash. The Ararat region, known for its fertile soil and seasonal flooding, could easily trap plant debris that over millennia would mimic the signature of decomposed wood. Others countered that the chemical ratios were too unusual to be random. They suggested that the soil beneath Durupinar had been altered by a large uniform mass that decayed in place, exactly the pattern expected if a giant wooden vessel had once rested there. Each argument seemed to cancel out the other, leaving the truth suspended between geology and legend. To many in the team, the mystery of Durupinar was no longer about finding a ship. It was about learning how the Earth remembers. Every layer of rock, every mineral, and every grain of soil seemed to whisper a fragment of a story written long before human memory. The land, it seemed, could record history even without words, keeping the memory of things lost, burned, or washed away by time. Standing on that cold, wind-swept plateau, one could not help but wonder if the ground itself was trying to tell us what really happened here 5,000 years ago. And if the soil still holds the echoes of something that once lived and vanished, what about the water that covered it? Could it also have left behind clues, traces of a flood powerful enough to reshape both land and belief? If the soil at Durupinar remembered something ancient, the layers of water and stone seemed to remember even more. To understand what could have shaped this land, scientists began to study the sediments that surrounded the site. Deep below the surface, they found traces of marine clay, salt crystals, and fossilized shells from saltwater organisms. These were not the kind of materials found in mountain soil. They belonged to the sea. It meant that at some point in history, the Ararat region, now dry and cold, had been completely flooded. When radiocarbon dating was applied to the marine sediments, the results placed their origin between 3,500 and 5,000 years ago. That time frame matched one of the oldest global flood stories in human memory, the Great Deluge described in Genesis. For researchers like Andrew Jones, the coincidence was impossible to ignore. He told journalists, "This is not random. The soil still carries the memory of water." What made the finding even more powerful was how it connected to another scientific theory, the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. In 1997, marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed that a massive flood had struck the region thousands of years ago when rising seas from the Mediterranean broke through the Bosporus. The event would have sent waves rushing into the Black Sea basin, raising water levels by more than 100 meters and drowning ancient settlements across Anatolia. If true, it would have been one of the largest natural disasters in human prehistory, a flood so catastrophic that survivors might have passed the story down for generations until it became legend. The soil near Durupinar seemed to fit this timeline perfectly. But the more evidence that surfaced, the more divided the scientific community became. Dr. David Montgomery from the University of Washington argued that the layers of clay and sediment could also result from ancient earthquakes and mudflows, not global floods. He pointed out that the Ararat Mountains sit on a major fault zone, where violent tectonic movements often reshape the terrain dramatically. Tim Newcomb, writing for Popular Mechanics, echoed this skepticism. He explained that Durupinar's structure could be a natural geological illusion formed by erosion and landslides acting together over thousands of years. Even within Turkey, the debate became political. The government restricted deep excavation around the site, citing safety risks from landslides and religious sensitivity among local communities. To some, the decision protected a sacred area. To others, it prevented the world from learning what truly lies below. Despite the restrictions, research continued through satellite monitoring and non-invasive imaging. Every scan seemed to reveal new shapes, as if the mountain itself were slowly surrendering its secrets. But with every discovery came another layer of doubt. Was it science confirming scripture, or just nature imitating myth? The flood stories, the chemical traces, and the silent landscape all pointed towards something extraordinary. Yet one mystery still lingered. If these waters once covered Ararat, what meaning did they carry for the people who lived through them? For thousands of years, the story of Noah's Ark has been more than just a tale of survival. It has been a symbol of hope, faith, and humanity's eternal search for meaning. In the sacred texts of Judaism and Christianity, the Ark is seen as the vessel of salvation, the bridge between destruction and renewal. According to Genesis 9:13, after the floodwaters receded, God set a rainbow in the sky as a promise that the earth would never again be destroyed by water. This covenant between God and mankind turned the Ark into more than wood and pitch. It became a symbol of forgiveness and second chances, a reminder that even after ruin, life finds a way to begin again. In theology, the Ark is often described as a shelter for the soul. It represents the idea that faith itself can be a refuge in times of chaos, a place where hope survives even when the world seems to collapse. That belief connects directly to the archaeological fascination with Durupinar. For believers, every layer of soil there is more than geology. It is a sacred echo of that covenant written in Scripture. Yet the story of the Ark is not confined to one faith. In Islam, the Quran also tells of the prophet Noah, who built a great vessel under divine guidance to save his followers and the animals of the earth. When the waters finally withdrew, the Quran says, "And it was said, O earth, swallow your water, and O sky, withhold," describing the exact moment the Ark came to rest upon Mount Judi. Many Islamic scholars have long debated whether Mount Judi and Mount Ararat refer to the same ancient range, but the symbolism remains identical: deliverance through faith and obedience. Across the Abrahamic religions, Noah, or Nu, is remembered as the one who preserved justice when the world turned corrupt, a messenger who carried humanity through judgment into rebirth. Modern theologians such as John Walton and Karen Armstrong see this story as a metaphor for civilization itself. They argue that the flood narrative reflects humanity's need to reset, to rebuild harmony with nature after cycles of greed and destruction. It is, in a way, the world's first warning about imbalance and survival. Even in today's secular world, the legacy of the Ark continues to evolve. Scientists, engineers, and environmentalists have borrowed its name to describe projects meant to protect life. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway is often called the Noah's Ark of Seeds, preserving the genetic future of Earth's plants in case of disaster. Digital archives that store DNA, cultural records, and species genomes are labeled as the digital ark of humanity. These efforts show that even in the age of satellites and data, people still hold on to the same ancient instinct to preserve life before it is too late. From religion to science, the Ark's meaning has shifted but never faded. It has become both a moral lesson and a scientific metaphor, reminding us that survival is not just about building walls against the flood, but about understanding what must be saved when it comes. Long before the story of Noah was written down, other cultures had already spoken of a great flood that wiped out the world. Across continents and centuries, over 250 flood stories have been recorded, from Mesopotamia to China, from the Pacific Islands to the Americas. Each one tells of a world consumed by water and a few chosen survivors who rebuilt life from nothing. The most famous of these is the Epic of Gilgamesh, written around 2100 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia. In it, a man named Utnapishtim is warned by the gods about an approaching flood. He builds a massive boat, fills it with animals and family, and survives the storm that destroys everything else. When the waters recede, his vessel rests on a mountain, a detail that mirrors the story later told in Genesis. The parallels are impossible to miss: the divine warning, the animals, the flood, and the mountain of salvation. Scholars believe the Hebrew version may have evolved from this older Sumerian tale, reshaped to fit the moral values of its time. But the pattern does not stop there. In Greek mythology, the gods send a flood to destroy humanity, and only two people, Deucalion and Pyrrha, survive by building a small ark-like vessel. In Hindu texts, the god Vishnu warns a man named Manu of an approaching deluge and tells him to build a boat to preserve all living beings. In Native American traditions, tribes from the Pacific Northwest to South America tell of massive floods caused by the spirits, forcing survivors to flee to high mountains or build rafts. Even in the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia, the land is said to have once been drowned beneath endless rain. The details change, but the message remains. Humanity remembers water as both destroyer and giver of life. For anthropologists, these stories are more than myths, they are shared memories. Dr. Adrian Mayer from Stanford University explains that ancient flood myths may have begun as eyewitness accounts of real environmental disasters. Rising seas after the last ice age, massive tsunamis, or collapsing glaciers could all have inspired tales that spread and evolved over time. The human brain is wired to turn trauma into story, and those stories survive far longer than the people who tell them. In that way, every flood myth becomes a time capsule, holding fragments of truth wrapped in faith and imagination. When scientists study the Durupinar site today, they are not just testing the land, they are testing memory itself. Was there truly a single flood that shaped all of these tales, or did humanity simply experience the same fear, the terror of losing everything to nature, over and over again? The echoes of that fear still live in us. From modern climate disasters to rising sea levels, we continue to retell the same story of survival, just with different names. Maybe that is why the legend of Noah's Ark has endured longer than any empire or kingdom. It speaks to something timeless, our instinct to protect life when the world begins to fall apart. And perhaps that is why, even now, people still climb the cold slopes of Ararat searching for answers. They are not just looking for a ship buried in stone. They are looking for proof that humanity's oldest story was not only about the past, but a warning for the future. Today, the quiet slopes of Durupinar no longer belong only to scientists or believers. They have become a place where faith, history, and curiosity meet. The Turkish government has officially recognized the site as a protected archaeological zone, preserving it within the Ara National Park. Once a remote patch of rugged land, Durupinar is now part of a growing tourism route that attracts thousands of visitors every year. For locals, it is both a sacred landmark and a new source of livelihood. In 2022, the Noah's Ark Visitor Center opened its doors. Built with glass panels that frame a perfect view of Mount Ararat rising in the distance. Inside, visitors can explore miniature models of the Ark, soil samples collected from the site, and radar images that show the strange shapes hidden underground. Interactive exhibits allow guests to scan the Earth virtually, following the same digital maps used by the research teams. The experience combines science and storytelling, inviting people to question what they believe while standing above the real terrain that inspired one of humanity's oldest legends. Outside the center, a newly paved trail leads to the Ararat viewpoint, a lookout point positioned to capture sunrise over the mountain range. From there, the entire Durupinar formation stretches below, shaped like a giant ship trapped in stone. For many visitors, the moment feels spiritual, a silent connection between myth and reality. Since major media outlets such as Fox News, NDTV, and CBN covered the renewed discoveries between 2021 and 2023, the number of visitors has surged by more than 200%. Hotels, cafes, and eco-lodges have begun to appear around the park, transforming what was once a forgotten valley into a hub for what officials now call faith and science tourism. The project aims to balance spiritual pilgrimage with environmental conservation, encouraging people to learn without damaging the fragile ground. Yet that balance is fragile. Archaeologists warn that too much foot traffic could erode the site's topsoil and disturb unstudied layers beneath. They urge local authorities to control visitor numbers and prioritize preservation over profit. To them, Durupinar is not just a tourist attraction. It is an open-air laboratory where nature and history speak in the same voice. Every rock, every grain of sand, holds potential clues that could rewrite how we understand the past. And every visitor who walks there becomes part of that unfolding story, whether they come as believers, explorers, or skeptics. In the end, the mountain stands as a symbol of two worlds colliding. It is both a relic of faith and a challenge to science, a place where myth refuses to fade and evidence refuses to rest. High in the mountains of eastern Turkey, the mystery of Durupinar continues to blur the line between legend and reality. For some, it is the resting place of Noah's Ark, a divine relic preserved in stone. For others, it is a geological wonder shaped by time and nature. But beneath the soil are strange things waiting to be explained. As science develops, people long to explore history to better understand what the ancients experienced. That not only satisfies curiosity, but also helps people draw many lessons from the past and live better for the future. If you have the opportunity to visit Turkey, I think you should at least set foot in Ararat once.